What are Crazy Granny Citlali's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. In my opinion, Citlali's absolute biggest selling point is that she is an amazing melt support. In fact, she might as well be the only melt support, because she's the only limited 5-star that we have as of now that really tailors herself to the reaction. More specifically, forward melt teams. These are comps where the pyro DPS is applying their element on top of Cryo. And the majority of pyro DPSs in this game were able to leverage Citlali's insane Cryo application. She also has the ability to shred pyro resistances, which only helps further Citlali's case as being the definitive best assault melt support for pyro characters. This especially applies if you're a Moeka main. Her application pretty much synergizes perfectly with her, and she was designed to be her best assault teammate. The two were 100% designed to be used with one another. However, even if you're not a Moeka main, but you play another pyro DPS, then you're still able to make use out of Citlali. She ends up being an excellent upgrade for Arlecchino mains as well, because using Citlali for forward melt is going to be stronger than playing her Vape teams. All around, using Citlali over Vape is going to result in the strongest possible way to play most pyro DPSs in this game. I will say that it gets a little bit more finicky if you're a Linny main. Yes, Citlali is hypothetically better for him, and his best possible performance is possible with Citlali. However, it's just a little bit more inconsistent than using Vape. This is mostly because Citlali's Cryo application isn't really fast enough for Linny, meaning that you have to delay your charge shots before you fire them off. His cat hats are also capable of ruining Cryo uptime if you hit them too early or late. So I will say, while Citlali is a good pull if you're a Linny main, it is going to be a little bit more difficult to work around, and you'd be completely justified for just sticking with Vape. But for Moeka and Arlecchino, Citlali is a definitive upgrade. So I would heavily suggest that you pull for her if you're really big on pyro carries, because basically all of them can benefit from her. I should also add that she's amazing for Skirk teams. Yes, even though she doesn't really help Cryo characters because she isn't able to shred Cryo resistance, she's good for Skirk specifically, and this is because you're always going to have at least one Hydro damage dealer within her team, whether that be Lady Farina, Yelan, or somebody of the sort. So Citlali's Hydro Res Shred is actually relevant for this team. And while you can opt to run your Citlali on Sacrificial Fragments in order to get more energy particles, you can also opt for R5 TDDS, which then buffs your Skirk's attack. Plus, not to mention the tried and true Cinder City set. We all know it, we all love it, and it's basically good on every Notlon support. And this allows it to be useful in her teams as well. So if you pull for Citlali, you're also getting a pretty decent Skirk teammate in the process. Now I wouldn't deliberately go out of your way for her for Skirk in particular, because while she most definitely is good for her, she's not best in slot. But with that being said, if you pull her for other reasons, then she ends up being a very flexible slot in here. And the reason why I mention this is because there is other reasons as to why you would pull for her. And with that being said, I should discuss how it's insane that this support is amazing for so many top tier carries. For example, take Novelet. I mean, considering that basically everybody and their mother works with this guy might make the synergy less impressive, but even so, it is indeed a strong synergy. And considering that the Hydro Dragon is still a strong character to this day, it is indeed a noteworthy synergy. I've already mentioned how she's able to help out Skirk, who was a very recent release, and a strong one at that. So she has fantastic viability in that field too, but the real highlight here is the fact that she's good with Moeka. And the reason why this is so crazy is because Moeka is currently the best DPS in the game, and I personally can't really see that changing anytime soon. Maybe in Nod Krai we will end up getting a stronger main DPS sooner rather than later, but for the pyro element in particular, I feel like Genshin is probably not going to touch it for a while. Moeka is going to remain as the definitive best assault pyro character for quite some time in my opinion. So this crazy granny being so good for her is very relevant, because not only is she Moeka's definitive best assault melt support, but she is a part of the best team in the game. That automatically grants her so much value. If you're somebody that wants to play the best possible highest DPS team in Genshin Impact, then you do want to pull for Citlali. And when you consider that so many of her other synergies are with top tier units, that only further bolsters her value. But working with Moeka in particular is an absolute blessing, because she is very strong, and I personally can't see her getting power crept anytime soon, because her damage numbers are just that high. While Skirk was indeed a very strong release, even she could not surpass Moeka in terms of damage numbers. I would say that if you're really into the motorcycle lady and you insist on investing it to her over a long period of time, then I heavily suggest that you look into getting this grandma, because she is one of the best possible investments that you can make for your motorcycle lady. And I should add, she has amazing Constellations too, so if you're somebody that likes to play high investment, then investing more Primogems into your Citlali isn't a bad idea at all. And I should add, high investment Moeka is an absolute nuclear bomb. C2 R1 Moeka is something to really reckon with, as if her C0 wasn't already wiping the floor of the game already, and getting Citlali's Constellations? You might as well be deleting the entire game at that point. I will say, getting her Constellations is a little bit iffy, because while they definitely are strong, I would like to still point out, Citlali remains as a niche unit at the end of the day. She's in a really strong niche, I will say that, holy heck. Basically, everybody she works with is a really good unit, and there is a 99% chance that she'll be able to find some sort of use on your account simply because she synergizes with such strong units. But with that being said, I feel like those support constellations that you pour into Citlali could rather be used on your DPS instead, because DPS cons these days are really strong. Support cons are amazing, but I mostly encourage getting those on universal supports. Citlali's not that universal, so whenever you invest more into her, you're investing into her niche specifically. So I do ultimately consider this point to be somewhat of a double-edged sword, because while her constellations are absolutely incredible, I would like to emphasize that, it is for a niche character. But if you're interested in Citlali's particular niche, then I will say, investing into her is only going to do you good, because I highly doubt that Hoyoverse is going to make a character exactly like her anytime soon, because she fills such a specific role. Might I add, but Citlali is the first ever real 5-star support that we got for Forward Melt. We've been able to play it before, obviously, it's not like this is suddenly a new reaction or anything like that, but Citlali is the first character to really capitalize on its existence. And she does her job beautifully, so I don't think Hoyoverse has any reason to replace her anytime soon. So her cons are amazing, but with that being said, I would definitely only get them if you're really big on Moika, particularly her because her constellations are mostly centered around Melt. Or if you're just into any other power DPS for that matter. And I would say it's a good investment if you play multiple power DPSs, because then you're able to just slaughter in with whoever it is you're playing. But I'd say if you pick just one, such as Arlecchino, Linny, Moika, somebody of that sort, get their C2 first, and then get Citlali's Constellations. That's my personal advice on the matter, and I do think her cons are amazing, so I did want to highlight them, but just consider that it is something that kinda comes with its own cons. I should also mention that she's capable of doing her own personal damage. It's really nothing crazy, she is mostly a support at the end of the day, however, it's a nice little additional bonus. It's obviously nothing compared to the ginormous nukes that your Moika's gonna be dishing out, but with that being said, she has some really high EM scalings in her kit. And that allows the crazy grandma to contribute a bit of damage of her own. It's nothing huge, but it's nice when you consider her overall package as a character. And with that being said, she's also able to provide a small shield. These little things all come together to make a character that's just overall really well-rounded, and is able to provide you with a whole lot of things. There's just a ton of utility packed into this kit in general. Alas, I would say that Citlali has one major con that I'd really like to highlight. She doesn't really help Cryo units, but I will say, this con has honestly diminished over time. Because here's the thing, this issue was still prevalent whenever she was first coming out. Unfortunately, her red shred did not affect Cryo characters, so despite her being the definitive melt support, she just wouldn't really be helping Cryo characters whatsoever. And this lady came out during a time where that element was still in need of some real help. So it ended up being kind of a disappointment. But that just doesn't really matter anymore because now we have Escoffier. We got that unit who ended up saving the element. Granted, that unit ended up saving Freeze in particular, but with that being said, this isn't really as much of a disappointing thing for Citlali anymore. It's more just kind of an unfortunate thing that it was left out of her kit. And to say that she just entirely doesn't help Cryos would literally just be wrong now, because we have Skirk, and she very much can help Skirk, and very much does have powerful teams of Skirk. So I will say, this is a flaw, and if you're somebody that's really big on Cryo characters, you're only really gonna get use out of Citlali for your Cryo teams if you play Skirk, and even then, you'd probably rather just use Shenhe instead if you have her. I would say the main circumstance in which you would use Citlali is that because she is such a universal pull that ends up being so effectively versatile, you would slaughter in with Skirk if you have a slot free, because it's unlikely that you would have Shenhe if you're somebody that's not really vertically invested into the Cryo element. And that's honestly a pretty realistic scenario, considering that support is so tailor-made towards a specific subset of characters that just wasn't really that good for a long period of time, compared to this much more universal support that's able to take care of a lot of different characters, all of which tend to be quite high-ranking units when it comes to how powerful they are. And then the last cons that I would point out in regards to Citlali would just be that her Cryo application can be a little bit finicky at times, which means that, for example, let's say you're trying to land your Moika's Burst, you want it to melt, oh dear, it didn't melt, you missed the melt. Or you're playing Linny, like I said earlier, you have to delay your charge attacks. It's a little annoying, but it's really not a deal breaker considering how much more damage you do with Citlali on the team as a pyro carry. Leveraging her ability to provide melt is just so freaking worth it. So all around, I am going to emphasize, if you're big on pyro characters, you really want Citlali. At the end of the day, I feel like if you're interested in what she offers, she is really going to impress you. She's honestly a really useful support, and I feel like the fact that she's a part of the best team in the game speaks for itself. Granted, the best team in the game could very easily change whenever we get a bit deeper into Nod Krai, but for now, she is definitely a good investment. I would say this, investing into her now expecting Moeka to still be the best carry in the game, I think that's a relatively safe bet. However, what's even safer is if you're investing into her as a main of Moeka, or if you're investing into her as somebody that just wants her to remain as the best pyro carry. I think both of those outcomes are basically very, very likely, if not guaranteed. And while I can't necessarily promise that going into the new region, Moeka's gonna remain the meta queen that she still is right now, although I do still expect her to be a very good unit for that matter, I 1000% expect her to still remain as being the absolute best forward melt support. Either way, are you gonna be pulling, or are you saving for Nod Krai? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video was able to tell you Citlali's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and at the end of the day, you could also just pull her because she's a crazy grandma.